We are now ready to call to order. So, okay. You look here, Kathy, it looks like you've been taking minutes for the committee at previous meetings. Would you be willing to do that again today?
Yes. Excuse me. I have to run and get
Okay.
water, but-
So we are called to order at 6:05. First item that we have on the agenda for this evening is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which I can share here with the magic of screen share. Assuming I can find the correct window. There. Okay. Minutes
Excuse
from the
me,
November
Eric.
8th.
Excuse me, I just want to confirm. Eric, Bill, Matt, Jillian, Martha, Katie, is anyone else out there? Okay, thanks.
Okay. So minutes from the November 8th meeting. Any questions, comments, anything of that nature? Otherwise, I would look for a motion to approve.
Thank you. Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion from Matt, second from Bill. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Minutes are unanimously approved. Okay. And that will take us up to the item up for discussion this evening, which is the proposed changes to the circulation policy that would allow a fine-free policy to be enacted at the library. So before we jump in and take a look here at the circulation policy, which I'm going to bring up here, it should be noted that we are not going to be eliminating the revenue line. It will certainly see a very noticeable decrease, but we will still have a fines and fees revenue because we will still have other fines and fees that we will be continuing to levy. So the fees that we're talking about this evening are really specifically overdue fees. Charges for damaging materials, replacement costs, all of that will still continue to be charged and is actually part of what makes going fines free, going overdue fines free possible, that will continue to do those things. So to jump in at the start here for the overdue materials policy, you know, some of the changes proposed made are pretty straightforward, such as just, you know, blanket statements to the effect that, you know, we charge overdue fines. Obviously, if we were to go overdue fine free, that would not any longer be the case. Where we get into actual policy considerations is in Circ 14. So it moves items to being considered that they go overdue essentially when they are past the due date, but then they become overdue for the purposes of system action once they've been checked out for 2 weeks. Once they are 2 weeks past the due date and they are still out to a patron. Once they are hit that point, the patron account is blocked until the item is returned. An item then becomes long overdue when it is overdue by 45 days. And at that point, the replacement cost is charged to the patron's account. Overdue and long overdue items can still be returned to the library and then the replacement cost waived up until they've been gone overdue for 180 days. Past that date, they are considered lost and the replacement cost must be paid. Essentially, by that point, we would have made a decision on the item, whether to replace or to, forego re-adding it to the collection, which sometimes happens if it's an older item that's been lost.
Mhm.
So we've had pretty extensive discussion as far as the details on this. The pattern that we're aiming to follow is one that's well established and in keeping with what other libraries neighboring us are doing, including Lake Forest, Cook Memorial, and Deerfield. The pattern for items go overdue. At overdue 14 days, the patron's account gets blocked. At 45 days, they get charged, and the 180 days is less common, but I think particularly starting out that it would be important to have that additional line in place. Since from the get-go, we'll be, you saw some of the FAQs and information materials that we had sent out, looking to educate folks as far as the new rules, as far as materials and making sure you get them back, and specifically that we're not going to charge you overdue fines, but it doesn't mean it's consequence free, and you do still need to get things back, get them back in a timely manner.
Yep.
Any questions in regards to the proposed policy changes? So I would look for any questions as well that anyone might have as far as the information document that I had sent out. We could take a look at that if that would be helpful. I really, in putting that together, felt like as we get started on this change, despite the fact that we're now to the point where we're kind of running catch up a little bit, taking a look at our 25 closest neighbors, there were only 2 other libraries that were still charging fines, and those were North Chicago and Highwood. And I've talked to both of the directors there, and their chief considerations are that generally they've been so cash strapped that they're unable even to really consider it. So that being, the case, it is something we want to move on, but as I believe it's something that we want to move on in a thoughtful manner, I figured that, pulling together to summarize all the information that we've gathered as far as why we would be making the decision would be a good step. And if it would be helpful, I could go through that document as well. But if everyone's read it and doesn't have any questions, I don't want to take up committee time either.
Is this the FAQ document you're referencing?
There's a lot of the same information on the FAQ document, but it would be the fine-free case statement,
Mhm.
which is sort of built like an FAQ, yes.
Got it.
Any questions, comments on that one, Matt?
No, I just want, when you offered to walk through a document, I just want to make sure I understood which one you were referencing.
Yeah. I could do the FAQ one. That one was a
That's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was one that Martha had put together specifically for sharing either in physical form, probably as a bookmark, and definitely onto the website.
Right, and a lot of that's in there is in the poster format as well as
Yes.
some questions in there.
So questions, thoughts? You guys are kind of quiet on me this
Yeah.
evening, so I'm not really
Yeah,
sure
I mean-
what would be most useful to jump into next.
No, I mean, I see that. I mean, the revenue from the fines is relatively small. You know, as you said in other documentation, the passport fees and some of the other things have more than replaced what we would lose in the fines. And you've had some patrons ask you about it.
We've got a growing number of patrons that have asked about it, and probably the biggest note of concern for me is that some of the patrons who've asked about it over the last 2 or 3 months haven't. It's been more insistent. The vibe that's starting to catch on is that nobody liked, paying overdue fines, but everybody just kind of accepted that it was a necessity as far as, operating a public library, that you needed to do that to, make sure that everything got back on time. And but now with so many libraries having gone fine free and demonstrating, look, not the case. You can do public library without, having to charge fines. There's a little bit of an edge that's starting to creep in with some of the queries that we've had recently, that
Mhm.
a feeling that a suspicion that maybe we're up to something naughty or acquisitive. So I always try to be attuned to that, because any time that somebody seems to be not just have a concern about what we're doing, but have that feeling that it's not the correct thing, then that's something that might end up being circled back around to later. So mentioning that for consideration, I am well aware that anytime that we get into considering a revenue line, that is a very serious consideration. We are not Highward of North Chicago, nor are we Glencoe, Lake Forest, or Cook Memorial in terms of our budget and budgeting considerations. But all things considered, including looking at the budget, and that includes the revenue sources that we've added, the passports, adding now the license renewal, as well as the honorarium that we had received for our contribution to the Quasqui Centennial, which, since the fall birthday bash is going to be continuing, is going to be a repeatable source of revenue as well. It's probably not going to be the $2,000 that we got this year as a contribution, but is going to be, it'll be noticeable as a new revenue source. So, we've been adding to our revenue sources, and because we have continued to improve patron access through our policies, the fine revenue has been on a 20-year downward trajectory. As a budget line, it was up to close to 5% of our revenue, and I think over $18,000 back in 1999. But at the time, we were charging for a lot of things that we wouldn't dream of charging for now. We had a collection like our trending titles collection, but it was required pay to check out with some pretty hefty fees if you kept it late. And we had a number of collections like that. I believe we charged for DVDs when we were first circulating those. And you know, a lot of fines and fees that we've smoothed out. We've smoothed out our circulation and usage policies. You know, most recently, of course, and having had the biggest, most recent impact was the auto renewal, but we had some pretty noticeable impacts when we have extended some of our checkout time limits in the past too.
Well,
So
and that's the critical thing for me is the auto renewal, because Lake Forest has had that for longer, and I take advantage of our reciprocity there. And it occurred to me when I first was exposed to that, once you have auto renewal, it effectively removes your fine structure, right? It's either
Yeah.
renewed and you no longer have it, or it's lost, or it's moved to like a different category. So that to me was was instructive, and it looks like our experience here, I'm just reading through your notes. I mean, if it's 70% year-over-year decrease or 67%, then I'm not a proponent. I'm certainly hear Kathy loud and clear of removing revenue lines, but this, as you pointed out, is a $2,500 revenue line at best, and has been declining, and probably has some, not only I wouldn't say reputational, just kind of ease of administration, any friction with the general public, not to mention just labor costs of having to deal with cash and whatever else, nickels and dimes. I mean, how much longer are we going to have nickels and dimes and quarter to use, right? So
yeah.
I just, I'm conflicted because I don't believe in removing a revenue line. However, given where this is, where our competitive set is and what other libraries like us are doing, and the relative de minimis amount relative to our budget is kind of, that to me said we probably have an easy decision here at the most basic level.
Yeah. No, the change on going fine free as far as staff time is it's not every fine transaction, but there are definitely fine transactions that can be really time intensive. We had one just this end of last week that was got pretty involved and ended up with a one staff member spending probably close to 15 to 20 minutes of their desk time running around tracking down two different senior staff members to work out exactly what needed to happen with a fine balance that was on someone's account. So there's definitely some efficiencies to pick up there. And I do think we've got other revenue lines in terms of things like photocopies and non-resident cards, and some areas like that tend to follow our activity. And so if we get an activity boost, which seems likely, one of the most common things that we've read as far as an outcome of this is that usage tends to go up once you go fine free. That should be a positive for some of our other revenue lines as well. Bill, do you have any thoughts, any questions?
No, I kind of, as Matt says, conscious of the fact of, as Kathy has mentioned, taking any kind of revenue generator away. But I think with some of the programs that we've, got in the works now and are generating revenue, I think that, and the fact that, the growing trend, and hopefully we'll see it in our numbers as well, as far as getting more people in. And I think you've got things in place that people can't abuse it. I mean, they'll be locked out of their accounts if they don't bring materials back. But
Kathy, I know you and I have discussed a bit as well. Do you have any?
Yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts, actually. I think that the way the policy is written, especially the kind of locking people out, is obviously to the library's advantage. That's a good thing. But I am simply, I can't support this, and I'll tell you why. And I applaud everyone at the library who's put time into this. I think the time at this point has exceeded its useful time because there's a lot to be done. Monday night, I spoke to a very small group of potential donors who came to visit the library, and Melissa Williams did an outstanding job with her presentation, and she quoted information, and there was one number that was put out there, and that one number was misleading, and it was picked up by someone in the audience very astutely and took a lot of wind out of our presentation. So that kind of presentation cannot go sour over and over again. So having someone say, I understand you've taken away dollars coming into the bank, into the library when you're asking for money doesn't make much sense to me. 22 neighboring libraries may have gone fine-free, but many of them have exquisite renovations that have been done by the taxpayers. And so the taxpayers should be rewarded with and not be paying fines for sure. We don't have that luxury. Since Labor Day, I've become aware of 3 possible consulting fees, one for project manager, one for the finishing work by our architects, which frankly, I had no idea those were going to be on top of the cost of our reading room. And then possibly last month, we brought up a consulting fee for salaries. So those are 3, I think about 20,000. I mean, I'm guessing the salaries, so I'm just kind of throwing that out there, $15,000 to $20,000 in dollars out of this year's budget, or perhaps into the fiscal year. I recognize that the small amount we're bringing in fines is not going to make a difference, but we haven't had a 12-month cycle of fines in almost in well over 2 years. So we don't even know what that number is that we're giving up. We are going to be knocking on the door of our patrons asking for fundraising. So yeah, they may say, well, why are you charging me a fine? I'd be sure to strike a deal with any donor, not that they don't have to pay fines, but as a rule, I don't see how we can really say, we're asking for money, this is what we need, but we're giving something up at the same time. So I don't think I've ever voted against anything as a member of the library board. So I don't want to have to do that, but I also have a strong fiduciary responsibility. And I think the public thinking we're naughty because we charge a fine, I'd be happy to just explain that I think we're being fiscally conservative. So that's pretty much where I stand.
Kathy, you are someone who I've worked with for a number of years, and I deeply, deeply respect you and your thoughts on fine free. You had mentioned that the importance of having the budget out in front of us while we were making this critical decision.
Right.
And I had worked with staff to pull that together so we could have that here tonight. As part of that, I took a look forward to next year and the projects that we'll have on the table. There's some electrical work in the Wood Annex building, some water heaters that are going to be scheduled for replacement. Routine stuff, looking out next year and beyond. And I do think that was a good and necessary activity to go through that. And in terms of looking at the budget, we can meet the expenses that we've got and need to meet. So I can, while we've definitely got some that we've picked up this year, we are going to be able to pay our bills and cover the costs that we need to cover, get the things that we need to get in terms of professional services. I recognize that we haven't gone a full year with having the auto renewal in place, but my sense so far in the trend is that we're trending downward in terms of revenue rather than up. And the main part of that, I think, is that some of the fines that we have been taking in each month they predate the pandemic. They're folks that are coming in, they're making use of the library again, they're paying off fines from early 2020 that they'd not really had the chance to pay off before. It wasn't enough to get their account blocked. So they just didn't worry about it until they came in and it was mentioned to them by a staff member at the desk. So that population of pre-auto renewal fines is going to be something that's going to be getting smaller and smaller over time. I agree with you, Kathy, that the number that we kind of muffed a little bit there on last Wednesday was not a great feeling. In terms of looking at the fundraising, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is wanting to have a bustling, vibrant library that people can get behind and support. And I know one of the conversations that I had regarding fines free right before we went into the wonderful world of COVID pandemic lockdown was with the vice president of the Friends of the Library, Lindsay Bornholt. And her take on it was that she had mostly stopped bringing her kids here to the Lake Bluff Library and was now taking them mostly to the Lake Forest Library. Because the fine free with a family was just too convenient. Her kids' row was a fine risk. It was a nuisance. They went to Lake Forest. I talked to one of our biggest supporters among young parents, and hear a story like that, and that's a gut punch, and it makes me wonder, about the conversations that we would have then in terms of support and people's willingness to support us, which is something that very much concerns me. I am still concerned about, having those conversations where we go out and people mention to us, well, you gave up a revenue source. Do you really need money? So, it's a balance. We can't go fine free and, still have the all the overdue fine funds. We have to do one or the other, and we can't have our cake and eat it too on this particular one.
Eric, when you've talked to neighboring libraries who've gone fine free, have they been able to document or validate the increase of more patrons coming through and circulation and any there? I know it's sort of difficult when it has been with COVID. I mean, it's kind of with your example of the one family. I mean, fines are intended to be a scare tactic to make sure you bring the materials back. And then you fear then if you stop doing the fines, then you're not going to get the materials back. But I think you run that risk anyway with people who would abuse the fines and maybe not bring their materials back, period. And but that I'd be so curious to hear. I mean, is it a 10% increase, 5% increase from what?
It varies, and a number of the libraries in the area here have jumped in during the pandemic, so their tracking's a little wonky as far as things. Katie, I believe that you had reached out to and talked to some neighboring libraries here who had gone fine free as we were putting together a proposal. But my understanding, looking at the numbers, was from those that we talked to that they had seen about in the range that you had mentioned, about a 5 to 10% increase. Katie, are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't recall exact numbers. I know like you said, it varies from library to library. I will say that there was not a single library that saw a negative impact in terms of engagement. And I think for pretty much all the libraries mentioned at least a slight increase in circulation. And the big number that stands out, and granted this is an anomaly and it's for a much larger library system. I believe it was an increase in the number of returned items, but the Chicago Public Library, when they went fines free, they saw a 240% increase. I think it was in the number of returned items when they initially went fines free. And I saw an article recently within the last few months that they have, while that was an initial excitement, people excited that they can return items without consequence, that they still continue to see a positive impact in their circulation numbers and their overall visit numbers. I think even I believe it's 2 years after the fact.
And that's a good note, and thank you for reminding me on that, Katie, that that was something that caught my attention there with the Chicago Public Library experience, and as a consideration too, that past a certain point, fines actually start to become can for some people start to encourage them to not bring the materials back. If they're not regular library users and a blocked card isn't going to be the end of the world for them, people sometimes will look at that and think, well, I might as well just keep it. And then they do.
Didn't Chicago have regular amnesty from time to time where they receive this wonderful info? I mean,
periodically they'll do these amnesty drives. Yeah. And they made a big push when they went fine free to get people to return, and they had a wave of things come back. We're not going to see anything like North Chicago, Chicago levels of materials coming back, because we don't have Chicago levels of materials that are still out there, even looking just at the percentages. But, anything that would get more materials back to us rather than having to deal with them as long overdue or lost, budgetarily that is noteworthy, because if somebody loses a copy of a new item, we've got to replace it, and it's an extra charge.
Well, you don't I don't need any convincing on the policy. I've tried to make that very clear. If I could jump ahead a year or so and know where we are in fundraising, whether we've had any success or not, and what additional charges are going to come out of the blue that we didn't anticipate, or setbacks or overruns, none of which we have the experience of dealing with, I'd be open to do anything, but I don't want to have to open lemonade stands in front of the library to keep things going. So I'd love to see an uninterrupted year of budget of look back on a budget of an uninterrupted year. I'm not the lead, Eric, policy has nothing to do with it. Respect for the library has nothing to do with it. It's just I feel that we're in uncertain times financially in the Lake Bluff Public Library system, and that is defensible to our patrons right now. Hopefully, encourage community support, move ahead, do what we need to do, be fine free. We want to be the best of the best, but I just can't. The license thing doesn't seem to me to have a lot of huge potential. I think that the passports is a magnificent opportunity for us, and I'm so glad it's thriving this year. But even this year is an anomaly because there was 16 months without passports, so there's a backlog. And you watched the news for the last week, and people may be cutting back on those trips to Norway and South Africa. So it's just an uncertain world, and our little library doesn't need a lot of uncertainty right now.
I should, since we have members of the public that are present, I should jump in here, I suppose, and as is usually the case at these meetings, having forgotten to do this at the start when I was supposed to. Katie, Martha, or Jillian, do you have anything that you want to add as a member of the public?
Well, obviously, I mean, working with the policy and the proposal, obviously, I'm very much in favor of going fines free. As the
This is
as the I'm sorry, oh, background noise, sorry. I have but just as the head of circulation and reference, I am the person that handles most significant that handles most significant fine transaction or fine issues with patron accounts. And so that does take up a fair amount of time in terms of talking to the patrons, figuring out what's going on with the account, explaining our policy, explaining, you know, ultimately finding some way to make them happy. And, you know, we really try to create this positive interaction between ourselves and the patrons, but the fines really do get in the way. And as Eric, as you mentioned before, we're starting to see more people really start to dig in about why we are charging fines. And my concern is that the longer that we continue to charge fines, the longer we are going to have these interactions with our patrons, with a growing number of patrons, that's going to cause friction. And the concern is that the conversations and the interactions are going to become more and more difficult to step away from, or to come away from, with ultimately the positive resolution that the patron is looking for. And I wanted just a couple of interactions that I've had over the little over 2.5 years that I've had since taking on this role, that just kind of highlights, you know, just how much time can be taken up with some of these instances.
Okay.
Before,
Keeping in mind, member of the public, Katie Horner, you've only got 5 minutes. So
of course, no,
so-
I've got there was one time where I had to have multiple long emotionally charged conversations with a patron who was very upset over a 10-cent fine. That was a discussion that was strung out over a few days. And then most recently, we had a family return a stack of movies that their kids had checked out. The movies were a week overdue, but everything was returned. There wasn't anything missing, but the family was charged with over $100 in late fines on their account. Everything was turned in. They were only 8 days late, but because of the stack of movies and the $1 fine, they now have over $100 on their account that they are responsible for. And the amount of time that we're spending to collect that money just is becoming less and less feasible from a staff and from a manager's point of view.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, Eric, I'm sure, I would certainly hope that Katie spoke well to her managerial duties and yours as well. You know, life is about accommodations and making exceptions. There's no reason why a particular client at a particular time can't be excused a situation and probably come out a stronger client and a stronger patron. So you all certainly, I'm sure, can exercise discretion whenever you feel necessary. I'm sure you do all the time.
We can and we do. I think what Katie is speaking to is in part the balance in terms of those conversations, and that patrons being aware that fines are no longer a thing at other libraries are more likely to lodge concerns and to push to not have to pay the fines that they have with us. So it's leads to more of a push and more of a conversation on the back foot, I would say, for library staff members. You know, that's just kind of the outcome of a setup where, you know, we have all these libraries in the areas that have stopped doing X, whatever X might be, and then, you know, it's no longer part of the conventional wisdom that we all just understand it, you know, is a necessary part of library service. So, but we have great staff. Staff are, you know, given definite instruction as far as making accommodations as necessary and as appropriate. And we provide a lot of guidance and instruction as far as where, you know, where there's flexibility in the rules, where there isn't. And that's part of providing the best possible service, which is what we always aim to do. Do Jillian or Martha, do either of you desire to add anything as a member of the public?
I have some thoughts. This is
Well,
Martha.
of course you do.
I managed CERC before Katie, and it is, those interactions can be very charged. It can also be a tremendous waste of staff time, especially if you get someone who is really upset about fines, which you do. I will also say most people are looking at this from a user perspective. They're not looking at this and saying, oh, the library is charging overdue fines, how fiscally responsible of them. They're looking at it as a user and saying, this policy is not user friendly. All these other libraries are doing it. What's going on here? It doesn't present us in a good light to the public. We are also, a huge part of our capital campaigns argument is saying that we are modern and relevant, and, you know, we are forward thinking, and fines are the opposite of that. There's really no evidence supporting it at this point other than revenue. And as we've said, you know, we've made up that revenue stream by more than 400% with passports alone. So I think that this is, I think it's something that we should really do. And I understand the fiscal considerations behind it, but I also think that it's a really difficult justification to make to the public based on the evidence that we have from studies that say that they don't work, and from studies that say that they harm low-income families or other people who are disadvantaged. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Martha.
Mm-hmm.
Jillian, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll be quick, Eric. I don't have the same kind of eloquent argument that Katie and Martha have, but I can speak to a personal nature, being somebody who has grown up my entire life with learning disabilities, that I 100% stopped going to Lake Forest Library. I grew up in Lake Forest, and I stopped going to them as a child because of fines. The pressure and the anxiety of being able to pay those fines was too much, and I could not be a library user because I'd get in trouble with my parents. Now, obviously, an adult, those anxieties still exist. And so as a staff member, we have the ability to use materials and return them in a timely manner without fines. And that is the only way I have access to the library, because I just couldn't, that's just not in me to be able to return something on time because of my learning disabilities. It's just part of who I am. And I know that that's kind of weird, but that's just the truth of it. And there has to be more people like that out there. So that's all that I wanted to add.
That's not weird at all, Jillian. Thank you for being so honest.
And you've got nothing to apologize for. You've proven yourself to be an incredible member of the staff, so we can.
The multitasker of all time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a symptom of my learning disabilities. And it's amazing at how directly affects my library usage. And now, because of my position and where I work, I'm able to utilize our collection. And it's been really wonderful to be able to have that kind of access again.
I think another way maybe to also look at this, I mean, if you're talking back in 1999, when you're talking about $18,000 and it being a very big generator, and as Matt said, the auto renewal was a one step, reducing that down. I mean, if we look at this as a way to increase our circulation by 5 to 10% and bring in those families who do, and I sympathize a little bit with Jillian. I know my kids that sometimes, oh, why aren't you going to the library? Well, I've got all these fines because I dropped the books off. Well, okay, we'll go in and we'll pay the $2 and then the kids go back in again. So if we can change that behavior and get more people into the libraries, I think it'll be a big plus. So if we look at $2,000, $2,500 as an investment to try and get 5-10% more people into the library, I think it will be a win-win situation. But I know I'm sort of bending things around a little bit, but it does seem like there's a lot of time and effort to collect very small amounts of money that cause a lot of stress to the patrons and to our staff for something that we could move forward with. So.
Oh, Bill. Bill, that too is extremely persuasive. You spoke well for everybody.
Right.
Okay. Any additional comments, questions, discussion? Kathy, Matt?
But nothing else on my end. It's alarming to me, and it makes sense, obviously, if we're out there fundraising, and the types of folks who we're going to be fundraising from traditionally are going to have be astute of finances and certainly of profit and loss statements, income statements. So that resonates a lot. At the same time, it's such a paltry amount. It costs us, some friction and emotional situations, as well as just, labor hours. So to me, I appreciate all the additional input. Some of those opinions I hadn't even considered, although I will add, my wife only 5 years ago renewed her Lake Forest Library card, which she had not had active since she was in middle school, just because of the fines, and she didn't want to pay them. But yeah, so I can somewhat empathize with some of the points of view there, but at the same time, it's more of a humor factor. Yeah, I just
name now.
Pardon?
She had a different last name now as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, although she wanted to, not hyphenate them, but substitute the middle name for, in any case, good point. Yeah, different surname. Yeah, so I don't have anything else to add. I appreciate all the points of view. I'm sensitive to all sides here. I just came into this kind of with an opinion that hasn't changed.
Okay. Kathy, do you have any last thoughts here? Otherwise, I think we're probably moving towards having run through our discussion and moving towards a vote.
No, nothing else to say.
Okay. If we're through the discussion portion, then we would be looking towards making a vote. The vote would be to send the policy to the library board, the full board, for consideration.
You're asking for a motion, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
To send the revised policy to the board. Committees don't approve policy, of course, on their own. So we're not making the final this evening. We're just voting to bring in the full board for the discussion.
I'll make the motion then to.
Okay. Motion from Bill, second from Matt. Probably advisable to do a roll call vote. Trustee Hayes.
Yes. Aye.
Trustee Meierhoff.
Okay.
Trustee Zaute.
Aye.
All right, vote is 2-1, and the proposed revision to the policy for going overdue fines free will go to the full board.
Yeah, and Eric, can I say one more thing, if you don't mind?
Absolutely.
Monday, I believe, I'm meeting Eric, I'm sure will be there, Melissa Waters and John Heinzelman, who's our kind of our fundraising guru. So I'm going to discuss them. I'm going to ask Melissa if we can put this on her agenda, so that I'd like to hear the fundraisers' point of view before the board meets next Tuesday. So I certainly will consider that, and I'll fill them in on where we are, where we want to be, the encouragement that Eric has given us and everybody else. So I only have one vote, and that's all I'm interested in, but I want to make sure that I'm being fair to everybody. So I will get their point of view as well.
That is definitely a great idea. I've had some conversations with them enough to not have gotten any giant red waving flags, but we should definitely get things nice and pegged down. Okay. Any other financial matters for consideration for the committee this evening? We've only got a few minutes left. Were there any big questions that anybody had on the initial draft budget?
Well, we never talked about it, so I think we've covered a lot. So
it was useful having it here. It was, and it was a useful activity to me in terms of going through it. And I think it was an important thing. Looking at a decision of this nature.
So I asked you this the other day, but for Bill and Eric, or Bill and Matt's point, we will look at this more seriously in January. Is that your goal? The budget.
Yes.
I think that's what you said. Yeah.
Because we're working a little bit ahead of the usual timeline. I've still got a few bits of information, a few details that are coming in from other members of the staff that they're still getting me a few things. So there's a few things still to finalize. None of the major pieces, just a few $100 here, $100 there, but those will have been shaken out by the end of the month, and we'll have our usual early January budget meeting, and then have the first reading at the January meeting of the full board.
Okay.
Okay. Barring any other questions, comments, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
I second.
Motion from Bill, second from Kathy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
6:59. Okay.
All right. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
All. Yeah. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.